There is a moment in every great defensive performance that nobody talks about. It happens before the tackle, before the header, before the block. It happens in the space between two defenders, in the half second where one steps and the other covers, where one pushes high and the other drops, where the partnership breathes as a single organism rather than two separate individuals. That moment is invisible to most people watching, but it is the entire foundation of elite defensive football. Welcome back to Noobinho. This is from 1 to 11. And in episode 2 we move out from behind the goalkeeper and into the most consequential partnership on the football pitch. The center backs, the numbers 5 and 6. The players who, more than any others, determine whether a team is genuinely hard to beat or simply hoping nothing goes wrong. Because here is something that gets lost in the conversation about modern football. People talk about systems. They talk about presses and high lines and positional play and inverted wingers and false nines. And all of that matters. But none of it works without defenders who understand not just their own job, but the job of the player standing 10 meters beside them. The partnership between two center backs is one of the most complex tactical relationships. In team sports, it requires spatial intelligence, constant communication, complementary profiles, and an almost instinctive understanding of when to act and when to trust your partner to act instead. Get it right and you build a defensive structure that is almost impossible to break down. Get it wrong, even with two individually elite defenders, and you have a back line full of gaps that any intelligent attacking player will find and exploit. Think about the great partnerships. Nesta and Maldini at AC Milan. Ferdinand and Vidic at Manchester United. Van Dijk and Gomez, Van Dijk and Matip at Liverpool. Piqué and Puyol at Barcelona. Ramos and Varane at Real Madrid. Every single one of those partnerships worked not just because of individual quality, but because the two players complemented each other in a specific, deliberate, tactically coherent way. One profile balanced the other. One strength compensated for the other's calculated risk. And crucially, the demands on those partnerships shift completely depending on the system they operate within. The center backs in a 4-3-3 pressing machine are doing an entirely different job to the center backs anchoring a 4-4-2 low block. The wide center backs in a 3-5-2 carry responsibilities that simply do not exist in a flat back four. The center backs in a 4-2-3-1 built for counterattacking football read the game from a completely different set of reference points than those in a possession-heavy system where the defensive line is the foundation of everything. So let us go through all of it. Every profile, every partnership dynamic, every system and every demand. Because to understand the center-back position fully is to understand the structural logic of football itself. We start at the beginning. We start with the player who existed before tactics became the dominant conversation in football. We start with the stopper. The traditional stopper center-back is the purest expression of defensive instinct ever put into a football system. His job description was almost elemental. Win the ball. Whatever it takes, wherever it is, win the ball. He was built for confrontation. Physically dominant. Aggressive in the challenge. Comfortable in aerial duels. Capable of making the kind of last-ditch tackle that changes the entire emotional momentum of a game. Nemanja Vidic at Manchester United is perhaps the cleanest modern example of this profile, taken to its absolute peak. Vidic did not play football in the way a technically gifted defender plays football. He imposed himself on it. He attacked strikers. He attacked crosses. He treated every aerial duel like a personal challenge to his authority in that space. And the effect on the attackers he faced was psychological as much as physical. By the end of a game against Vidic, strikers were not just beaten. They were exhausted by the confrontation. But the stopper never worked alone. And this is the central truth about the position that every tactical conversation eventually comes back to. The stopper requires a sweeper. The aggressor requires a cover. The player who steps requires a partner who reads the space left behind. The sweeper, or libero in the language of the Italian tactical tradition that gave the role its most sophisticated expression, is the defensive partner who operates from a position of intelligence rather than aggression. He does not chase the ball. He anticipates where the ball will go. He positions himself not to win the next duel, but to win the one after that, the one that happens if his partner is beaten. Franz Beckenbauer invented the modern understanding of this role. At Bayern Munich and for West Germany, Beckenbauer demonstrated that a defender could be the most technically gifted player in the team, could carry the ball forward, could read the game 3 moves ahead, could control tempo and space from a deep position without ever abandoning his defensive responsibilities. He made the sweeper position into something approaching an art form. The chemistry between stopper and sweeper is about complementary instincts. When the stopper steps aggressively to press the ball, the sweeper reads that movement and shifts to cover the space vacated. Not reactively, proactively. He is already moving before his partner commits to the challenge. This is what separates a genuine defensive partnership from 2 defenders who simply happen to be playing in the same back line. Alessandro Nesta at AC Milan operated as perhaps the most complete version of the cover defender in the modern era. Alongside Maldini, himself a defender of extraordinary positional intelligence, Nesta brought an elegance to defensive covering that made the entire Milan system look effortless. He did not tackle loudly. He intercepted quietly. He was in the right position before the situation demanded it, which meant the situation almost never became critical in the first place. But as football evolved, the stopper-sweeper binary became insufficient. Not because it stopped working, but because the game began demanding more from center-backs than the ability to defend. It began demanding the ability to build. The ball-playing center-back did not emerge as a stylistic preference. It emerged as a tactical necessity driven by the rise of high-pressing systems that force teams to play out from the back under extreme pressure. When an opponent is pressing aggressively with 2 or 3 players from the front, the center-backs become the primary ball recipients in the build-up phase. They receive the ball in tight areas. They are pressed immediately, and they must make fast, accurate decisions under that pressure, or the press succeeds and the team concedes possession in a dangerous area. This changed the profile of center-backs that elite clubs went looking for. Comfort on the ball became non-negotiable. Not just the ability to pass it short safely, but the ability to drive forward with it, to switch the play with a single long diagonal, to receive under pressure and play through the press rather than around it. The center-back became the build-up engine of the modern team. John Stones at Manchester City represents this evolution as clearly as any player in the Premier League era. Under Guardiola, Stones was not asked simply to defend. He was asked to think like a midfielder from a center-back position, to receive in tight spaces, to drive into midfield when the opportunity opened, to play short combinations under pressure, with a comfort that most center-backs of previous generations would never have been asked to develop. Stones was not always the most dominant aerial defender. He was not the most physically intimidating presence in a back line, but his technical ability and his tactical intelligence within Guardiola's system made him genuinely irreplaceable in the build-up phase, because the system was built around center-backs who could function as the first line of the midfield structure when City had the ball. Gerard Piqué at Barcelona played a version of this role for a decade, using his reading of the game and his exceptional passing range to control the tempo of Barcelona's positional play from the deepest position on the pitch. His long switches, his ability to step into midfield and progress the ball, his composure in 1-versus-1 situations created by Barcelona's highline, these were not just individual qualities. They were the foundation on which Barcelona's entire offensive structure rested. Now let us talk about what happens when you put 2 ball-playing center-backs next to each other, and what happens when you do not. The most effective partnerships at the elite level almost always feature a degree of Complementary contrast. One defender who is more aggressive and front foot, one who is more positional and cover-oriented. One who leads the press, one who holds the line. One who drives forward with the ball, one who holds defensive shape. The contrast is not a weakness in the partnership, it is the partnership's strength. Ruben Dias and John Stones at Manchester City is a masterclass in this dynamic. Stones provides the technical fluency and the midfield-adjacent positioning in build-up. Dias provides the defensive authority, the aerial dominance, the vocal leadership, the aggressive recovery when the line is breached. Together they cover the full spectrum of what an elite center-back partnership needs to be. Individually, they are outstanding. Together, they are the structural reason City can play the way they play without defensive exposure. Virgil van Dijk at Liverpool is perhaps the most studied center-back of the modern era, and for good reason. What makes Van Dijk extraordinary is not one elite quality taken to its maximum. It is the combination of physical presence, positional intelligence, aerial dominance, passing accuracy, and the ability to defend in 1-versus-1 situations without ever looking rushed. He is the complete center-back, and his effect on the defenders playing beside him is the quality that gets talked about least and matters most. When Van Dijk is at his best, his partner does not need to be world-class. Joel Matip, an excellent but not elite center-back by the standards of the very top, became a transformed player alongside Van Dijk, because Van Dijk's positional certainty reduced the demands on Matip. Matip knew exactly what Van Dijk would do in any given situation, which meant Matip could commit fully to his own responsibilities without the anxiety of covering for uncertainty. That clarity, that trust, is the invisible ingredient in every great defensive partnership. Sergio Ramos at Real Madrid represented something different entirely. Ramos was the aggressor, the leader, the front-foot defender who treated the penalty area as territory to be dominated and defended with total conviction. His partnership with Raphaël Varane over nearly a decade was one of the most decorated defensive relationships in the history of the Champions League, and it worked precisely because Varane's intelligence and pace in behind gave Ramos the freedom to step aggressively without the fear of being caught out. Varane covered the space. Ramos attacked the ball. Simple. Devastating. Antonio Rüdiger brings a different energy to the position, explosive, physical, capable of covering enormous ground with pace that most center-backs simply do not possess. His ability to recover from high positions, to engage in aggressive pressing actions far from his own goal and still get back into defensive shape, makes him the ideal profile for systems that demand their center-backs participate actively in the press rather than simply holding a line. At Chelsea under Tuchel, at Real Madrid under Ancelotti, Rüdiger's athleticism gave his defensive partners the license to step because everyone in the system knew he could recover even when the press was beaten. And then there is Thiago Silva, a player who has redefined what defensive reading looks like at the very highest level across 4 different decades of football. Silva does not defend with pace. He does not defend with aggression. He defends with information. His positioning is so consistently correct that situations which would create genuine danger for other center-backs simply do not develop in the same way around him. He sees the danger, forming 3 passes before it becomes a threat, and adjusts his position so quietly, so efficiently, that the danger disappears before it ever truly arrives. Now let us shift the conversation from profiles to systems, because the same center-back can look like a completely different player depending on the tactical structure around him. And no system changes the demands on the center-back position more dramatically than the back 3. In a 3-5-2 or a 3-4-3, the center-back partnership becomes a center-back triangle, and the roles within that triangle are distinct, specific, and non-interchangeable. The central center-back is the anchor. He is the most defensively pure of the 3, the player around whom the other 2 organize, the reference point for the defensive shape. His job is to hold the line, command the aerial space, and be the last decision-maker when the defensive Structure is under maximum pressure. The wide center-backs in a back three are a tactical invention that deserves far more analysis than they typically receive, because in possession they are not center-backs in any traditional sense. They are the wide build-up players, the players who stretch the pitch from deep positions, who drive forward with the ball when the wingbacks push on, who provide the diagonal passing lanes that break the opposition's first line of pressure. Alessandro Bastoni at Inter Milan under Antonio Conte and later Simone Inzaghi is the defining example of the modern wide center-back taken to its absolute ceiling. From the left of a back three, Bastoni does not simply defend and pass. He invades. He carries the ball into midfield with the confidence and technical quality of a genuine midfielder. He plays combinations in tight areas. He creates overloads in the half space that the opposition structure is simply not designed to deal with, because their defensive plan accounts for the wing-back and the midfielder in that zone, not a center-back. This is the genius of the wide center-back in a back three. When he advances, he creates an asymmetry, a positional problem, that the opponent's defensive shape has not been set up to solve. The attacking midfielder covering that zone is suddenly facing a center-back who can play through him, past him, or around him with equal comfort. Creates genuine confusion in the opposition's press and genuine space creation in the attacking phase. The defensive demands on a wide center-back are equally specific. When the team is out of possession and the wing-back has been pushed high, the wide center-back must cover the entire flank, defending wide against wingers and full-backs in areas where a traditional center-back would never be asked to operate. His ability to defend 1 versus 1 in wide positions, to track runners in behind, and to recover across the pitch when the wing-back is caught upfield is a completely different skill set to the central defensive game. Which brings us to the high defensive line, the single tactical concept that has done more to transform center-back play in the modern era than anything else. A high line is not a defensive posture. It is an offensive weapon. When two center-backs push their line 15, 18, 20 meters from their goal, they are not defending deeper. They are compressing the pitch. They are reducing the space between defensive and midfield lines to almost nothing. They are suffocating the opposition's ability to receive, turn, and play forward, because every time they try, they are immediately surrounded by bodies in a compressed zone. But holding a high line is one of the most psychologically demanding tasks in defensive football, because the risk is absolute. If the line is beaten by a well-timed through ball, the goalkeeper has already been discussed. But the center-backs must hold their nerve. They must resist the instinct to drop, because the moment one center-back drops while the other holds, the line is broken and the press collapses. The offside trap, which is the high line's most powerful defensive mechanism, requires a level of coordination between two center-backs that goes beyond communication. It requires trust, absolute, unconditional trust that your partner will step at exactly the moment you step. One defender stepping half a second late does not just give the attacker a run at goal, it gives him a run at goal from an onside position with the entire defense already moving in the wrong direction. Piqué and Puyol at Barcelona under Guardiola executed this at its most extreme. The line was aggressive, the press was relentless, and the coordination between those two center-backs, their timing, their communication, their absolute certainty about when to step, was the defensive foundation on which Guardiola's entire attacking philosophy was built. You cannot play that way with center-backs who doubt each other. You can only play that way with center-backs who have trained together, communicated obsessively, and developed an almost telepathic understanding of how the other player reads the game. Now contrast that with the center-back partnership in a low block, the system that sits at the opposite end of the defensive philosophy spectrum. In a deep 4-4-2 or a 5-4-1 that defends in a compact low block, the center-backs are not trying to compress the pitch. They are trying to protect it. The line drops deep sometimes, inside the penalty area during sustained pressure, and the center-backs become managers of space rather than hunters of the ball. Their job is to ensure the central areas remain impenetrable, to deal with crosses, to clear second balls, to organize the defensive shape under the relentless pressure of an opponent that has the ball, the territory, and the momentum. The profile required for this is different in subtle but important ways. A low-block center-back does not need to be comfortable receiving under pressure in his own half because his team will often play direct when they win the ball rather than trying to build through the press. He does not need the pace to sweep in behind a high line because he is not playing one. He needs aerial dominance. He needs physical resilience. He needs the psychological hardness to defend for 80 minutes under sustained pressure and still be switched on and decisive when the moment demands it. This is where the profile conversation becomes genuinely nuanced because the same qualities that make a center-back elite in a high-press system can be liabilities in a low-block structure and vice versa. A center-back whose ball-playing qualities are central to his identity provides little additional value when his team's tactical plan is to bypass the press with direct balls rather than play through it. A stopper who excels in physical confrontation can be exposed by the increased spatial demands of a high-pressing system that asks defenders to cover ground quickly and defend in transition. This is why the manager's job when assembling a center-back partnership is not simply to find the two best defenders available. It is to find the two defenders whose combined profile fits the tactical system most precisely. The chemistry question is not just about individual quality. It is about systemic compatibility. The progressive passing center-back has become a premium profile in the modern game, and the reasons are structural. In a possession-heavy system that builds through the thirds, rather than over them, the center-back's passing ability is not a bonus. It is the mechanism through which the entire attacking sequence is initiated. When the center-back can carry the ball forward, attract a press, and play through it with a single incisive pass into the midfield line, he has effectively broken the opponent's entire defensive block in one action. The passing lanes a progressive center-back opens are not just about the ball's immediate destination. They are about the movement they trigger. When a center-back drives forward, with the ball past the opposition's first pressing line, the opponent's midfield must decide, step to press the ball or hold their position and maintain defensive shape. Either decision creates an opening. If they step, a passing lane opens behind them. If they hold, the center-back has progressed the play by 20 meters unopposed. The progressive center-back is not just a defender who can pass. He is a tactical problem generator. Recovery positioning is the least glamorous and most important dimension of center-back play, and it is almost never discussed properly. Because what separates elite center-backs from very good center-backs is not just what they do when they are in position. It is what they do in the 2 or 3 seconds after they have been taken out of position. Every defender gets caught out. Every defensive line gets broken. The question is never whether a gap will appear. It is how quickly and intelligently the defenders reorganize once it does. Elite center-backs do not panic when they are out of position. They identify the most dangerous space on the pitch, not the ball, and they move to cover it immediately. This recovery intelligence is trained over thousands of hours and refined through thousands of hours of video analysis. It is not instinct. It is learned pattern recognition at speed. The defensive rotation between center-backs and the players around them, particularly the defensive midfielders in a 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1, is where partnerships become truly sophisticated. When a fullback pushes forward and leaves space on the flank, the nearest center-back shifts wide to cover. When that center-back shifts wide, a gap opens in the central defensive zone. That gap must be covered by either the remaining center-back shuffling across or the defensive midfielder dropping into the space. This rotation is not improvised. It is choreographed, rehearsed on the training ground until the movement becomes automatic. The communication between center-backs and defensive midfielders is as important as the communication between the center-backs themselves. In a 4-2-3-1 with a double pivot, The two defensive midfielders and the two center-backs function as a four-player defensive unit, constantly adjusting positions relative to each other and to the ball. The language between these four players during a match is relentless. Constant instructions about space, about the line, about pressing triggers, about when to step and when to hold. Switch that communication off, lose one of the voices in that unit to injury, to loss of form, to a bad day, and the entire defensive structure becomes less fluent, less certain, less hard to play against. Pressing triggers are a concept that center-backs in modern systems must understand with complete clarity. A pressing trigger is the moment, the specific action by the opponent, that signals to the entire team that the press is on. A misplaced pass, a back pass to the goalkeeper, a touch that takes a player away from goal. When the trigger fires, the entire team, including the center-backs, must respond simultaneously and with total conviction. A center-back who does not read pressing triggers, who is half a second slow in recognizing the moment, drags the entire defensive line out of sync. The press that was designed to suffocate becomes the gap that gets exploited. Compactness, the maintenance of tight defensive distances between all units, is the center-back partnership's primary defensive responsibility when the team is out of possession. The distance between the center-backs and the defensive midfielders. The distance between the center-backs and the defensive line as a whole. The distance between the center-backs themselves. These are not fixed measurements. They shift continuously as the ball moves, expanding slightly when the ball is wide and far from goal, compressing aggressively when the ball enters the central zone near the penalty area, maintaining that compactness under pressure when the opponent is trying to stretch and create gaps. That is the defensive discipline that defines elite teams. And it is discipline that comes from the center-backs outward. When the center-backs hold their shape, the players in front of them are given a reference point, a foundation from which to press, to recover, to hold their own positions. When the center-backs lose their shape, when they are drawn out of position, when their communication breaks down, when their compactness dissolves, the effects ripple through the entire team. The midfield loses its defensive anchor. The fullbacks lose their spatial reference. The goalkeeper loses the line he needs to manage the space behind the defense. Great defenses are not built from the front. They are built from the center-back position outward, through partnerships, through communication, through the relentless discipline of two players who understand not just their own job, but the job of everyone around them. The numbers 5 and 6 are not simply two defenders. They are the load-bearing wall of every tactical system ever designed. Change the system and their responsibilities shift. Change the era and their technical demands evolve. But remove them, remove the intelligence, the communication, the partnership at the heart of the back line, and there is no system sophisticated enough to compensate for the absence. Every elite team in football history has been built from this position. Every great manager has understood that before you press, before you possess, before you attack with fluency and creativity and devastating pace, you must be hard to score against. And being hard to score against starts here, with two defenders who trust each other completely, who know each other's game better than the opposition ever will, who step together, cover together, and hold together until the game is won. Next episode, we move out wider. We move to the position that has transformed more dramatically than any other in the last 15 years of football. The fullback, the player who was once a specialist defender and is now expected to be a midfielder, a winger, an inverted playmaker, and a defensive anchor, sometimes all in the same 90 minutes. The numbers 2 and 3, and the complete reinvention of what it means to play on the flank of a back four. Episode 3, the fullbacks, coming next.